All rise. Please be seated, sir. You can remain standing for a moment. Why don't you call the witness? Your Honor, the government calls Demetrius Harris. Please raise your right hand. Yes, sir. Have a seat, please. That's a new cover on the mic, so you can take your mask off. You may proceed. Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir. Good morning. If you would state your name again and spell your last name. Demetrius Harris, Harris. Mr. Harris, how old are you? 38. Mr. Harris, do you have a nickname? Yes, sir. What's your nickname? Michi. Mr. Harris, are you currently in custody? Yes, sir. Are you in federal or state custody? Federal. What are you in custody for? Drug distribution. When were you arrested for that offense? February of 2013. Have you been in custody since that date? Yes. So approximately 8 or so years? Yes. Mr. Harris, in your case, your drug distribution case, did you plead guilty or did you go to trial? I pled guilty. And you've been sentenced in that case? Yes, sir. And what sentence did you receive? 17 years. Besides that case that you're in custody for, Mr. Harris, do you have any other criminal convictions? Yes, sir. What other convictions do you have? Drug possession from 2000, drug possession from 2002, and an aggravated fleeing from 2012. So you are currently serving that 17-year sentence you just described? Yes, sir. And it was in federal court, that conviction? Yes. Was it in this building? Yes, sir. And are you testifying here today in hopes of receiving time off that sentence? Yes, sir. Is anyone forcing you to testify today? No, sir. Has anyone promised you anything in exchange for your testimony? No. Have I told you your sentence will be reduced? No. Do you understand that there are no guarantees that your sentence will be reduced? Yes, sir. Do you understand that I'm the prosecutor and I do not control your sentence? Yes. Was I the prosecutor on your other drug trafficking case? No. Who do you understand controls your sentence and whether you will receive any time off? The judge. The judge on your case? Yes, sir. What do you understand you need to do in order to even have any hope of having any time off your sentence? Tell the truth of my cooperation. Now, your drug trafficking case, did you try to cooperate with the government in that case? Yes, sir. Did you receive any consideration for that cooperation? No. And you said it was drug distribution. Is that right? Yes. And just to be clear, that case had nothing to do with this case, correct? No, sir. Mr. Harris, have you used drugs in the past? Yes. What sort of drugs have you used? Marijuana, promethazine, ecstasy. Would you say you were addicted at one point? Yes. Have you received treatment? Yes. When was the last time you used drugs, Mr. Harris? Prior to my current case, 2013. So more than 8 years ago? Yes, sir. Mr. Harris, I want to ask you questions about your upbringing and background. Okay, sir? Okay. Yes. What city were you born in? Chicago. Where in Chicago did you grow up? On the west side. What neighborhood? The K-Town area and the area of Lexington and Springfield, Lexington and Pulaski. When were you living in that area? I was living in the area of Lexington and Pulaski, Lexington and Springfield from the age of, I'd say, 6 to like 14. And then where did you go at 14? To the K-Town area where my father's side of the family resided. So was your mother's side of the family near Lexington and Pulaski? Yes, sir. And then at 14, you moved to your father's side? Around 14, 15, yes. Did something happen when you were 14 or 15 that caused you to move to your dad's side? Yes, sir. What happened? My uncle was killed. Did you attend high school, Mr. Harris? Yes, sir. Where did you go? John Marshall. Mr. Harris, I want to ask you some questions about gang membership. When you were a younger man, did you associate with a gang? Yes, sir. Which gang? At first, I associated myself with the Four Corner Hustlers. And how old were you when you began to associate with them? Like 14, 15. Why did you associate with them? Because I had an uncle. He was a member of the Four Corner Hustlers, and I looked up to him, so I wanted to be like him, so I considered myself a Four Corner Hustler. What was your uncle's name? Frank Harris, a.k.a. also known as Frank Nitty. Was that his nickname, Frank Nitty? Yes, sir. Was this the uncle you mentioned a moment ago who died? Yes. And was Frank Harris a Four Corner Hustler? Yes, sir. Did Frank associate with a particular faction of Four Corner Hustlers? Yes, sir. Which one? The Gordy Fours. Who are the Gordy Four Corner Hustlers? My Uncle Frank, Ronald, Jesse, Labar, and Spiffy, a number of them. Do you know why they were called the Gordy Four Corner Hustlers? Yes, sir. Why? Because Gordy was the chief of them. Do you know Gordy's last name? No, sir. And if I could have the government computer? Mr. Harris, I put up on the screen what's marked as Government Exhibit 137, which is in evidence. Do you recognize that person? Yes, sir. Who is that? Gordy. Is that the person you understand to be the leader of the Gordy Four Corner Hustlers? Yes, sir. And you named a few people. Your Uncle Frank? Yes. Ronald, Jesse, and you said Labar? Yes. Who's Labar? Brother man. Do you see the person you know as Real Man in the courtroom? Yes, sir. If you would identify him, please. The gentleman in the wheelchair. Your Honor, let the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant, Labar Span. It will. How long did you associate with the Four Corner Hustlers? Approximately about a year or two. During that time, did you spend time with other Four Corner Hustlers? Yes, sir. With your Uncle Frank? Yes, sir. How often? Almost every day after school. During your time as a Four Corner Hustler, did you learn if the Four Corner Hustlers had any hand signs? Yes. What was their hand sign? They would throw up their 4 fingers. Sir, you're raising your right hand and putting up 4 fingers with your thumb behind it? Yes, sir. Emily, could you put on the witness view? Did you ever use that hand sign? Yes, sir. Did your Uncle Frank? Yes. During your time as a four-corner hustler, did you ever hear four-corner hustlers speak to each other or identify each other in a certain way? Yes. In what way would they do that? They would acknowledge each other and call each other for, or say things like, "What's up for?" or "Come here for." What's up for? Yes. So is it a way of identifying a fellow member of the gang? Yes, sir. Did you communicate that way? Yes, sir. Did your Uncle Frank? Yes. Now, you identified the defendant, Mr. Span. How did you know him, or what did you know him as? What nickname? Brother Man. Is that what you called him? Yes, sir. Do you recall when you first met Bro Man? Yes. When? He came over to my mother's house with my uncle. Approximately how old were you? About 13, 14. And what year were you born? 83. So 13 or 14, we're talking 96, 97? Yes, sir. Was Bro Man older or younger than you? Older. And you said he came over to your mother's house? Yes. So you said earlier that your mother's side of the family was over by Lexington and Pulaski? Yes, sir. Where was your mother's house? And you said the first time you recall meeting Bro Man, he came over with your Uncle Frank? Yes. And your uncle was a four-corner hustler, correct? Yes. What were your Uncle Frank and Bro Man doing when they came over to your mother's house? Hanging out, talking, and then my mother moved to North Laverne, and then they started coming over there, hanging out and bagging up drugs. So your mom first lived at a different location and then moved to, where was it? Laverne? Is that on the west side of Chicago? Yes. And what was your relationship between, well, strike that. Your Uncle Frank, was that your mother's sister? My mother's brother. Mother's brother, excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Harris. So you said that Mr. Span would come over to Laverne with your Uncle Frank? Yes. And how often would you see Mr. Span at the house on Laverne with your Uncle Frank? Maybe about 3 days a week. And was this during the time frame when you were a four-corner hustler at the age of 13 and 14? Yes. And what would you see Mr. Span and your Uncle Frank do together at the house on Laverne? Bag up drugs, like packaged drugs. And how old were you at this time? Like 14, 15. And what would you do when they were bagging up drugs? I watched them. Sometimes I do things like boil hot dogs for them, stuff like that. Make them food? Yes, sir. So you were a young man, but did you know what sort of drugs they were bagging up? Yes. What sort of drugs were they bagging up? Crack cocaine. Could you estimate how much drugs they would bag up on each occasion? Approximately 4 to 5 ounces. And you said this was 3 days a week? Yes, at least 3. Can you estimate how long this went on for? Maybe about almost a year, up until the time my uncle was killed. When was your uncle killed? 1998. Do you remember the month? January. And we'll come back to this, but how did your uncle die? He was killed driving in his car. He was shot and killed. Where in your mother's house on Laverne would Mr. Span and Frank bag up the drugs? Living room. Did Mr. Span or any of the other Four Corner hustlers have a nickname for you? Yes. What did they call you? Lil Nitty. Was that named after my uncle? 'Cause your uncle was Frank Nitty? Was Frank Nitty and I was Little Nitty. Now, these drugs you saw Frank and Mr. Span bag up, do you have an understanding of where those drugs were sold? Yes. Where do you understand those drugs were sold? The Pulaski area, the area of Lexington and Pulaski, Polk and Pulaski, Arthington and Pulaski, Fifth Avenue and Pulaski. Did you have an understanding of who controlled the drug sales in those areas you just mentioned? Yes. Who did? Gordy and his brother Lil Charles. And who's Lil Charles? Gordy's brother. And were both Gordy and Lil Charles Four Corner hustlers? Yes. So you talked about being at Laverne at your mother's house. Did you also spend time on Lexington? Yes. Did you have a relative who lived on Lexington as well? Yes. Who lived on Lexington? My grandmother. What block did your grandmother live on? 3800 block. Who lived with your grandmother there? My auntie and my Uncle Frank. Did you ever stay there? Only on weekends, and weekends when I got out of school. On the weekdays when I got out of school, I stayed there until like 10 o'clock, and then when my mom got off work, she took me home to live. So you spent a lot... I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Harris. She took me home to Laverne. So you spent a fair amount of time on Lexington? Yes. So you'd get out of school and you'd go over to the 3800 block of Lexington? Yes. Would you say you went almost every day? Yes. And again, are we talking about the same time frame when you were a Four Corner hustler? Yes. 13, 14, 15? Yes. When you were over on Lexington after school, would you see your Uncle Frank there? Yes. Would you see Labar Span? Yes. How often? Almost every day. Would you see them on the block or in a house? On the block selling drugs, hanging out. Who would you see them with? I see Spiffy, a guy named Spiffy, Tracy, Lil Mike, Spank, Ronald, Jesse, guys like that. And did you associate these people as being Four Corner hustlers? Yes, sir. And you considered yourself to be a Four Corner hustler? Yes. Now, as a Four Corner hustler, did you understand that a dispute arose within the Four Corner hustlers? Yes, sir. When do you understand that dispute arose? I'd say around 1997, somewhere around that year. And what is your understanding as to who was on the two sides of this dispute? From my understanding, one side was Brother Man's side and the other side was Gordy's side. Do you understand what caused the dispute? I think drug turf. Now, at a certain point, did you stop seeing Frank and Labar Span together? Yes. And you said that Frank died in January of 1998? Yes. Was it during this dispute? Yes. So when Frank died, did you continue to be a four-corner hustler? No. What did you do? I went over to my father's side of the family, which was in the K-Town area, and that's when I decided to become a gangster disciple. A gangster disciple? Yes, sir. Why did you decide that gang, a gangster disciple? That was my father's side of the family, and then I didn't no longer want to be a four-corner hustler because from my knowledge they had started killing each other and also had something to do with my uncle being killed, so I no longer wanted to be a four-corner hustler.